Welcome everyone to another FutureDAMS lecture series. FutureDAMS, I'll just briefly give you guys an overview because I see a lot of familiar names. For those who don't know our research consortium, FutureDAMS, we do a lot of research and capacity building work on planning and governance of water, energy, food, environment systems here. And one of our initiatives is this webinar series, which is organized by Rose Sumner and I. And today we're really excited to have two of our colleagues from IIED, Neha Rai and Sejal Patel. Neha is a senior researcher at IIED who works with climate finance and climate change, and she's got a lot of years of experience in the area of climate change, working on climate finance, policy, and monitoring and evaluation. Sejal is an environmental economist who works as a researcher in climate change at IIED as well, and she also works on public policy analysis, climate finance, and governance, broadly speaking. And today, the title of the presentation is Climate Finance for Hydropower.
Today, we'll be discussing some of our key findings in the space of climate finance support to hydropower. And Neha will then ground this discussion in a presentation of two case studies outlining how they were showing good practice in meeting climate finance criteria. So if we start this discussion by grounding it in the climate space, in terms of decarbonization, we need to be seeing a decoupling of emissions and generation and power. Power generation accounts for approximately 40% of energy-related emissions and over 25% of global greenhouse gas emissions. The IEA's Global Energy and Carbon Emissions Status Report in 2018 found that the current global average for grid emissions are at 475 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. This means that we need an over 90% reduction in grid intensity to 50 grams of carbon dioxide per kilowatt hour for compatibility with Paris Agreement pathways. And this is in the face of increasing energy demand globally, meaning we have to significantly reduce the carbon intensity of our energy systems. So what is the role of climate finance in this? Climate finance is finance that is used to support the transformation to low-carbon, climate-resilient societies. Climate finance can be local, national, or transnational financing drawn from public, private, or alternative sources. In this research, we were focusing particularly on multilateral climate funds. So these are international pots that have been set up to support developing countries. These international climate finance pots are relatively small. The main function of financing is essentially to play the role of facilitating climate considerations to be mainstream in decision-making. So essentially nudging activities to be designed and implemented in a climate-informed way. And yet we were seeing that climate finance has not been supporting dams in any significant volume. Dams are being seen as old and proven technology, meaning that they have already been capitalized for centuries without the need for climate finance to come in and make projects viable. So they've been characterized by, they've also been characterized by high social and environmental risks. And indeed, there have been many cases where dams have very negatively impacted on local communities and local ecology. As a result, there's a large international anti-dam lobby, and they object to climate finance being used for dam projects. So just to go into the figures a little bit more and to break them down a little, since 2004, hydropower dams have received $700 million from multilateral climate funds. Nearly half of this has been in the form of loans and a quarter as grants. This is in comparison to $300 billion of climate finance for renewable energy in 2016 alone. 90% of that financing was for wind and solar energy. So the $700 million going to hydropower, that was sourced from 4 climate funds. So the fund on the left, the Clean Technology Fund, that has a mandate to scale up low carbon technologies. It has supported 4 large-scale dam projects, providing an average of $101 million per project. So large amounts of financing over a few projects. The next fund, the Green Climate Fund, has supported 2 hydropower projects. These are both large-scale hydro. The average funding is $68 million per project. One of these projects aims to facilitate a power system transition. This is a project in the Solomon Islands that Neha will speak about in a bit. And the other focuses on climate resilient regeneration for environmental and social sustainability. Then the next fund is the Scaling Up Renewable Energy Program, which is funded 4 projects with an average funding of 20 million per project. All 4 projects that this fund is supporting concern increasing electricity access through mini or micro grids. And finally, the Global Environment Facility has supported 26 projects with an average of 3 million per project. These have tended to be small-scale marketing, promotion, and capacity building projects, including in some cases the construction of small dams. So now coming back to look at hydropower itself, we were seeing that hydropower dams have the ability to play 3 critical roles in enabling a just transition. All these roles aren't necessarily available for all dams, so it's dependent on a number of factors, including where they're built and what the power grid looks like. Also to note that these are in addition to the predominant role of hydropower generation. These roles stem from a number of ancillary services that dams can provide, but that have not consistently been valued in the market system, and therefore they're not necessarily integrated into project designs and broader energy systems. So one key role is energy storage. It's very useful more broadly in the energy system, but particularly when onboarding and using more intermittent renewables. To look at dam energy storage in relation to diesel or other types of electrical energy storage, we can see that dams are already playing an important role in this function. Around 94% of current energy storage capacity in the world is from hydropower dams. However, energy storage capacity globally is still very small, and it now needs to be expanded quite rapidly. So dams provide an opportunity here because there are already many that exist in the world, and in some countries they provide upwards of 90% of electricity generation. So it's not a stretch to use these existing resources to retrofit dams with, for example, pump storage reservoirs rather than building new storage infrastructure. And so that can help save costs and improve the efficiency of existing systems. Another key role is the provision of grid stability services. These are services which are essential to onboarding more renewables. So, for example, in 2011, Ireland's EirGrid and the system operator for Northern Ireland, Sony, undertook a joint process to identify and value the services their integrated grid needed to support a transition. The program, which was called Delivering Secure Sustainable Electricity System, DS3, was established to develop the grid to meet the challenges of operating electricity in a safe, secure, and efficient manner, whilst facilitating higher levels of renewable energies onto the grid. As part of this process, they identified 14 system services that were needed for the grid to support the onboarding of a higher level of non-renewable renewables. These services included synchronized inertial response, for example, which is a response in terms of power output, speed, and frequency for power imbalances. And that's an important factor in accommodating higher levels of renewables. Another is fast frequency response, which is the delivery of a rapid active power increase or decrease by generation or load in a time frame of 2 seconds or less. So it's to correct supply and demand imbalances and insist in managing power system frequency. So a key takeaway from that exercise was that hydropower actually has the ability to provide 13 of the 14 system services that they identified as part of it. One example where that's taking place in practice is the Nord Pool market. The Nord Pool market is a cross-border electricity system integrating Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, the Baltic states, and some mainland EU states into a common regional market. The regional interconnections give the member countries the capability to access diverse energy resources and use hydropower services more efficiently. More than half the annual power generation on the market is from hydro, 20% from nuclear power, 15% from fossil fuel generation, and the rest from other sources. So low-price hydropower from Norway can leverage out wholesale prices across the market, whilst also providing flexibility to other power systems in the region, for example, supporting Denmark with its high wind penetration. The pump storage capacities in Norway helps balance needs by enabling both downwards and upwards regulating capacity. So making use of flexibility of hydropower for variable outputs which is particularly useful in a diversified grid, where generation from intermittent renewables can change quickly, and given the need to address peak loads and daily energy demand variations. But we are seeing that hydropower is still commonly being used as a baseload energy in many developing countries, so a shift in the use of hydropower more broadly is still needed. And another key role that dams can play is in providing water storage services. So this can help attenuate flood and drought shocks, which will become increasingly important in the face of climate vulnerability. So we are seeing that hydropower dams have the ability to play a number of key roles in the energy transition, and yet these aren't commonly being tapped into or supported. So from our research, we found 7 key reasons for this misalignment. The first is a lack of additionality. So as I've been talking about, dams are still being used quite commonly in business as usual ways in many cases. They're operated as cheap baseload power and being used in ways that qualify as proven technology. So they now need to be designed to serve the needs of transitioning grids, not grids in the past. So dams are needing to better present the case of how they will integrate into energy systems and provide those key ancillary services that provide additionality for the energy system. Another key concern is the potential for high carbon emissions. So this is particularly an issue for shallow tropical dams. Their typical life cycle emissions are of dams in general are between 5 and 15 grams of carbon dioxide equivalent per kilowatt hour, which is comparable to solar, wind, and nuclear. But there is evidence of dam emissions as high as 3 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent per kilowatt hour in some tropical areas. And that's largely owing to above water decay of trees and other biological matter. So those levels of emissions are comparable to fossil fuels. These concerns about emissions led to large dams being excluded, for example, from the Clean Development Mechanism. So there's a need to assess the life cycle emissions for each specific site. Another key risk is hydrological risks to the reliability of hydro, which is particularly important given the changing climatic conditions. Some grids now have low energy system resilience due to overdependence on one type of energy. In the case of hydro, this means drought events or low onset reduction of water flows that can cause the dams to experience lower generation and cause the operators to conduct load shedding. So a controlled lowering of generation capacity to protect the power system, but at the expense of rolling power cuts and limited electricity use. And that can last for short or long periods of time. So this can present a risk, for example, in some LDC countries, where hydro accounts for approximately 30 to 100% of energy generation in half of LDC countries. So this is also where regional integration of grids, such as what I was talking about with the Nord Pool market, can become an important mitigating factor, sharing energy services provided from different energies to their competitive advantage. A further key concern that we were seeing is for climate finance, particularly on the side of climate financiers, is reputational risk. So hydropower projects are high risk on social and environmental factors, and project developers need to be transparent and need to be demonstrating how they are engaging all stakeholders from the beginning and how they're adhering to safeguarding policies. So climate finance is particularly transparent source of financing, and it receives a lot of scrutiny, and it won't support projects which have high social and environmental risks which aren't being mitigated. Other key reputational concerns are around political risks relating to country government processes, which can create delays in programming. Significant delays or political events in countries can lead to financing collapsing. So climate and other types of finance will lose confidence in the project. And so products like the MEGA political risk guarantee can mitigate those factors to a certain extent. Another barrier we were seeing was costs. So dynamic energy markets, and especially where the price of renewables are falling and with subsidies, it can make hydro less competitive. This is particularly the case if hydro is being used just for baseload. The use of hydropower as a dispatch energy and the use of grid services that hydropower can provide can build an economic case for its use. Another potential issue is climate funds seeing hydropower construction as too slow given the urgency of the transition. So hydropower are large infrastructure projects. They require high levels of resourcing initially, and they take a relatively long time to construct. This is changing, but climate finance in some cases has had fairly short-term perspectives. So it also comes back to making the case for hydro within the broader basin system and the broader energy systems, and how they're aligning with long-term country strategies. And finally, there are also sometimes appears to be inconsistencies in the interpretation of how hydro fits into climate fund mandates. So whilst such projects need to be considered on a case-by-case basis, climate funds also aren't providing very much in the way of direction or indication of what standards are applicable, or an exposition of why certain cases were rejected. So hydro project proposals submitted, on the other hand, are also potentially not making the case very clear. So there needs to be some direction from both sides on making the case for hydro in climate finance clearer. From our research, we have some recommendations for both hydropower project developers and grid operators, and for climate financiers, for bringing some more of that clarity and supporting hydropower projects to be designed to incorporate those ancillary services that can benefit the broader water and energy systems. So project developers could make a stronger case on the market role of dams in wider energy systems. So they can do that by analyzing the future needs of the grids and see what ancillary services that the dams can provide to support that, and the role that the dam will play in that future energy system, and how these will be valued within the energy market structure. So building that sort of economic case through bringing in those extra services. They can also undertake robust analysis of dam design. Particularly for resilience and for hydrological risks. So model the water energy system with a range of climate futures, demonstrate how to tackle risks and how to minimize regrets from the initial stages. They can also undertake strategic basin assessments to identify and mitigate impacts on the environment. For example, potentially high emissions that you'd get from placing a dam at certain points in the river, and impacts on the ecology. So, for example, a strategic basin assessment was undertaken in the Ganges River Basin, and that challenged many long-held beliefs about the basin. The objective of the assessment was to build knowledge and promote an open, evidence-based dialogue on the shared opportunities and risks of cooperative management in the basin. The assessment looked at infrastructure storage options, largely in Nepal, and hydropower and flood control, and economic issues related to low flows for irrigation and ecosystems in India and Bangladesh, and also a number of other aspects of the system. The assessment found that climate change uncertainties in South Asia and the Ganges Basin in particular are extreme, but that the range of the mean of basin runoff predictions is roughly comparable to recent historical records and to the basin's highly variable climate today. So the assessment highlighted specificities and complexities of the river Ganges basin system, and it demonstrated the need for a full basin assessment to identify strategic directions, including the need for improved regional coordination in water sharing, weather and climate information, and warning systems. And finally, project developers could make the case, therefore, for how dams will support a climate resilient pathway of the grid system. So how will it meet adaptation and mitigation objectives more broadly? And how is it supporting and building the resilience of local and indigenous people? Is that through benefit sharing mechanisms? And is that through bringing them in early on projects? And on the climate financiers side, we we recommended that the climate funds set clearer criteria for dam projects that they'll support. So helping to incentivize those ancillary services to be incorporated into dam designs. And I guess the premise is that if there are several key services that are needed to enable the high penetration of intermittent renewables on the grid, like the 14 services that were identified in that study in Ireland and Northern Ireland, then climate funds need to be clear on supporting these services to be met, and not just supporting those intermittent renewables. So having that whole of energy perspective. And in some cases, that will be by providing support to dams, and in other cases, that will be alternative options. But that sort of broader intent needs to still be there. And related to this, so climate funds can support investing in the climate resilience of dams where it makes sense to. So in cases where it's valuable to support the rehabilitation of dams, both for enabling the hydropower to continue providing those energy and water services to the local communities and to and more broadly in the national context, but also in supporting the opportunity for those dams to then be retrofitted, so to provide further grid services. Another recommendation was to support those basin assessments to take place, so providing readiness funding and building in requirements such as for assessments to be taken place in the fund guidelines and procedures. And finally, to invest in market restructuring to better value the transition services and to underwrite additional costs. So to support regulators in creating markets for those services and to provide financing to de-risk private investment into transition dams. Market structures can vary quite widely. So in unbundled energy markets like in the UK and Germany, grid operators and utility companies frequently pay for regulation services, for flexibility markets, and for backstop services in several ways. Similarly, in India and China, although their energy markets are vertically integrated, grid operators value energy storage and grid stabilization services highly enough to encourage investment. However, in many countries, there has still been a challenge to attract private investment to these services. So to sum up, we were seeing a number of conditions for hydro to meet in order to be compatible with making a case for climate finance. So these were for dams to show that they are being socially and environmentally just, to show that they are low carbon, particularly in tropical areas, to build the climate resilience of the water and energy systems and of local communities and other key stakeholders, and finally to evidence additionality. So what is the value of the dam in working towards those climate resilient low carbon pathways? And the value for bringing climate funds in is that climate funds have built up experience quite broadly in developing regulations and policies that are heavily scrutinized for supporting socially and environmentally just sort of delivery. So it's better to bring in that expertise and that knowledge in designing activities in a socially and environmentally just way, of facilitating meaningful stakeholder engagement, and having that climate input, than to not consider supporting these projects at all. Okay, so I'll now pass over to my colleague Neha, who will discuss how these conditions look on the ground and how two projects have met climate finance policies. So thanks, over to you, Neha.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Sejal, for such an insightful presentation. I'll just support all the comments that Sejal made by adding a bit on the case studies that we've done to actually see how climate finance is funding two main projects, which is the Solomon Islands project and the Morocco's One Wind Energy project, which is being funded through GCF and the Clean Technology Fund. In my presentation, I will try to ground this discussion in examples of these sustainable hydro projects that have been backed by climate funds, Sejal very clearly explained several years of barriers that we have seen in accessing climate funds for dams due to various reasons. For example, climate funds struggle to see the paradigm potential in dams, as hydropower is considered a proven technology and not transformational enough to justify climate funding, primarily because alternative energy or renewable energy, which is newer RETs, are considered more transformational. Funds also seek for the additionality of using scarce climate finance for hydropower. As a result, many projects that we've seen have been rejected by climate funds for lacking evidence of what will be the value added of funding through climate funds. But we clearly see in Sejal's presentation the potential of hydropower in sustainable energy systems and how climate funds can add value by funding sustainable transition dams, or what we also call the new age dams. In my presentation, I will take you through these examples of funding hydropower that are designed to support and stabilize intermittent renewable energy. So we look at two case studies. One is the Solomon Islands Tina River project that has received backing from GCF. And the dam in this case is playing a very important role in Solomon Islands energy transition. The second one is the Morocco's One Wind Energy Plan, which received backing from the Clean Technology Fund of Climate Investment Funds, which is a MDB, or a Multilateral Development Bank lent fund. Now, the Tina River project in the Solomon Islands receives funding from the GCF in 2017. And in the country, the actual situation before the funding came was that the maximum electricity to the grid is supplied from diesel generators, which is quite an expensive fuel. And the dispersed nature of the islands, the grid connection is quite a big major challenge across the islands. As a result, we see that in Solomon Islands, the electrification rate is fairly low, around 45%, and many rural areas are served by small PV panels, while the state-owned power utility company, which is SIEA, is almost entirely dependent upon diesel generators for supply to the capital. So the country is highly dependent on imported diesel, and the capital cost of connection is quite high, making electricity rates in the country almost amongst the most expensive in the world, around 0.85 USD per kilowatt hour. So all these aspects, which is the high capital cost as well as the high cost of energy, makes it quite difficult to attract the private sector to invest in Solomon Islands. So what role is public finance playing here in incentivizing private investment? So when we say public finance, it's the Green Climate Fund here and the MDB finance. So the two main aspects which GCF is funding here amongst the four components of the project. So the first component of the project is actually the construction of the plant, which is developed on a public-private model of build, own, operate, transfer arrangement, under which the national government partnered with a private company to form a special purpose vehicle, an SPV company, to oversee the project's construction over 4 years and operation over 30 years. So at the end of this project, ownership of the hydropower is transferred to the country, and under the arrangement, a tariff for purchasing the electricity is generated, which is agreed upon from the project company. Now, in this case, to finance all the parts of the project component, which includes the construction, the access road, the transmission line, etc., would mean that the PPA, or the purchasing power agreement tariff, would have been too high for the government utility to afford it. So to bring the tariff down, the government, the GCF, all decided that the funding should go to non-revenue generating components, such as the building of the access road and transmission line, which was outside of the BOOT agreement. So basically, climate funds are used in incentivizing private investment in the Tina Dam, where the funding of the non-revenue generating schemes would allow the country to remove barriers for financial viability to the project, both for the investor as well as the SIE as the off-taker. So all the non-revenue generating components are taken care of by GCF, and it was essential in enabling a power purchase agreement between the company and the private body, which is K-Water, at an accessible rate. The other elements, which is not funded by the GCF, but it's crucial to mention and is also an important financial product, is the IDA partial risk guarantee that covers investors and their shareholders for the risk of a government failing to perform its contractual obligations in a private project. And that's something which is provided in this project. And the third element is MEGA, which is the insurance arm of the risk guarantee arm of World Bank, that provides political risk cover against situations like war, currency risk, and breach of contract for the duration of the construction period. Which was also a part of this project. So climate finance as well as public finance are used to incentivize private investment in Tina Dam using all these three combination of products. Now, all these projects that access GCF funds are required to prove how they meet the investment criteria of the fund. So what made GCF really approve funding for hydropower? We know, we've heard in the case of Sejal's presentation that it's been a struggle for many hydropower proponents to actually meet GCF or any climate funding criteria to prove that it has a paradigm potential, it has impact potential, it has more sustainable development potential. As a result, it can be quite challenging for these kind of projects to get funding if they are unable to meet these criteria. So when the Solomon Island project was being evaluated by the independent panel of GCF, they once again raised the concern about its paradigm shift potential and that hydropower could crowd out other renewable technologies on the grid, for example, by providing cheaper electricity than wind or solar, and it could disincentivize diversification to other renewables. However, one of the things that the project proponents were able to prove that allowed investment in hydro through this was that they had three main reasons to justify the paradigm shift potential. One was that the shift from 100% diesel would be a definite reduction in cost for the country. The second was it will allow energy storage for solar, which was quite innovative. And lastly, it will be a first utility scale renewable energy project in the country. So the project was proven to be the first of its kind that will provide flexibility to the power system to enable higher penetration of solar power without the need for large and expensive energy storage or diesel generators. So that was the logic that won the argument in case of proving to the Green Climate Fund why this scarce funding should go to hydropower. So clearly, from the example, we can see that climate finance can play a value-added role by funding hydro projects that support and stabilize other renewable technologies in the grid. Then we looked at another example, which was, I think Sejal already mentioned in her presentation, was the Morocco's One Wind Energy Plan. And that is funded by the Clean Technology Fund, which is a part of the Climate Investment Funds, which is a multilateral fund set up by World Bank and delivered through different other multilateral development banks. Now, Morocco's One Energy Plan is a good example which funds hydro for more sustainable transitions to alternative renewable energy technologies by a state-owned office called Office of National Electricity, called ONE. So this company ONE had a plan called One Wind Plan, which aims to develop infrastructure and business models to scale up wind power and rural electrification, particularly with the purpose of tapping the 25,000 megawatt of wind power that Morocco has a high potential of. So the project funded by CTF provides grid stability services by constructing wind and hydro, including related transmission and transmission infrastructure. So the objective is to offset the irregularity of wind power with consistent hydropower and create an integrated renewable energy generation system that makes Morocco electricity, the supply of electricity more reliable in the long run. So the project is quite innovative in terms of supporting the grid, increasing the wind capacity by retrofitting a pumped hydropower storage reservoir into an existing hydropower plant to provide energy storage when the wind turbines built into the plant produce excessive energy. So in a way, the hydropower component effectively is de-risking the private financing of wind expansion under this project. So what makes One Morocco fit the criteria to access this climate fund or from CTF or the SAFEs? I won't go into the details of the investment criteria it's trying to fit, but I will speak about only the two main points which makes the project unique and stand out in comparison to the business as usual hydro, which often fail to access climate funds. One is the project was able to demonstrate potential at scale, which in many countries we often know that wind power development is constrained by the lack of dedicated transmission network, which needs public financing. So the project critically signaled how the high potential with increased possibility of wind penetration using hydropower, offering a grid stability and storage possibility. So that was the main thing, which was the USP of this project. The second thing was that it underwrote transmission and storage costs. So the additional funding from Climate Fund ensured private sector interest by ensuring viable returns for the investors. For example, it buys down the cost of low carbon growth through soft financing available through CTF subsidies by underwriting hydro storage and the related transmission costs. So it really brought down the actual costs for the private sector. So in a way, it was able to meet the main criteria which tick the boxes for accessing the climate funds. I think I won't go into a lot of details because we have limited time on this, but I'd just like to conclude by saying that these examples clearly show that the scarce climate finance can actually play a key role or a value-added role in reducing the cost of capital for private sector to invest in transition hydro. Secondly, it can de-risk investment in renewables expansion by addressing the intermittent nature of renewables, as we saw in case of Morocco. And this last point is around the role of climate finance is providing in providing a policy signal like restructuring markets to reward transition services. For example, if it provides policy signal that energy storage and stabilization services are valued highly enough, it will encourage more investments in the long run. So those are the three main value-added points where climate finance or climate funds can play a key role here. I'll leave it here, but we're happy to take any more questions. And this is the publication and the link that I've provided here, which you can access for further details on this project and the outcomes of this work. Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for joining. There's some questions on the chat room. This session is recorded and will be available on our website, futuredams.org, in a couple of days. We've got a few other webinars lined up in the series. June 16, that's 2 weeks from now. Dale Whittington, who's at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, will be joined by Carrie Smith from Arizona State, and they'll present their findings on their paper on a history of ex-ante economic assessment of dams. And 2 weeks after that, we're trying to do this every Tuesday. I'll switch hats and share some of our findings from the econ team here at Manchester on irrigation dams in Ghana. And to stay updated on all our future lectures, please visit our website, futuredams.org. And I'd like to thank Neha and Sejal again for sharing your work. It was great having you here, and virtual applauses we'll have to do at a webinar. Yeah. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for attending.